Welcome to Experiments in Happiness with Michelle Lemus, the podcast for high-achieving women who've checked all the boxes but still feel something's missing.
I think a lot of high-achieving women live in a constant state of trying to fix themselves, and honestly, for a long time. I don't even think we realize we're doing it because it feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels like self-awareness. You notice something feels off, and immediately your brain goes into problem-solving mode. How do I fix this? How do I improve this? How do I optimize this? How do I stop feeling this way? And on the surface, that sounds healthy, especially if you're someone who's capable, someone who's solution oriented, someone who's used to figuring things out. Because when you're good at solving problems, you start approaching your entire life like a problem to solve. Your habits become projects, your emotions become projects, your relationships become projects, your mindset becomes a project, even your healing becomes a project. And honestly, I think eventually that creates this quiet pressure that follows you everywhere because there's never a moment where you're just existing inside your life. You're constantly trying to improve it, constantly trying to adjust yourself, constantly scanning for what needs work. And I think what's tricky is that society rewards this, especially in high achieving women. We praise self improvement constantly: growth, optimization, productivity, discipline, healing, mindset work. And again, none of those things are bad. I love growth. I think self-awareness matters, but I also think there's a point where constant self-improvement quietly turns into self-rejection, where you stop relating to yourself with curiosity and start relating to yourself like a project that's never fully finished. And honestly, that's exhausting because there's no rest in that. There's always another thing to improve, another habit to fix, another emotional pattern to solve, another thing you should be doing differently. And I think eventually you stop knowing how to simply exist without evaluating yourself. You stop allowing yourself to just feel something. Every emotion immediately becomes something to analyze. Why do I feel this way? What does this mean? How do I stop it? What should I do differently? And I think what's interesting is many women are not actually uncomfortable because of the feeling itself. They're uncomfortable because they immediately start resisting the feeling, trying to change it, fix it, escape it. And honestly, I get why. Because discomfort feels vulnerable, especially if you're used to being emotionally competent, if you're used to holding it together, if you're used to functioning well. Feeling off can feel threatening. So your brain goes, okay, how do we solve this as quickly as possible? And I think that creates this really subtle but exhausting way of living where you never actually let yourself land anywhere emotionally. You're constantly trying to move yourself into a better state, happier, more productive, more healed, more confident, more motivated, more calm. And I think eventually you become emotionally tense all the time, even when your life is technically okay, because you're constantly tightening against your current experience, trying to improve it, trying to optimize it, trying to escape it. And honestly, I think some women have become so used to fixing mode that they don't even know how to simply be present in their lives anymore. The second there's discomfort, they go into management mode. The second there's uncertainty, they start overthinking. The second there's sadness, they try to reframe it. The second there's anxiety, they start searching for solutions. And again, sometimes solutions matter. I'm not anti growth, I'm not anti change. But I think there's a huge difference between intentional growth and compulsive fixing, because compulsive fixing usually comes from the belief that I cannot feel okay until this is resolved. That's important because if your nervous system believes I must fix this feeling immediately, then you never actually learn how to safely exist with discomfort. And honestly, I think that's part of why so many people feel emotionally exhausted now. Not necessarily because life is always terrible, but because they're constantly emotionally managing themselves, constantly monitoring themselves, constantly trying to move away from discomfort. And that takes energy, a lot of energy. I noticed this in myself a while ago when I realized I rarely let myself simply have a feeling, even a temporary one. If I felt disconnected, I immediately wanted to understand why. If I felt unmotivated, I immediately wanted to solve it. If I felt anxious, I wanted strategies. If I felt sad, I wanted perspective shifts. And eventually I realized I wasn't actually allowing myself to experience life naturally anymore. I was constantly trying to engineer myself into feeling better. And honestly, there's a certain level of pressure that comes with constantly trying to optimize your emotional state. Because now every uncomfortable emotion feels like evidence that something is wrong. Like, why am I still feeling this? Why haven't I figured this out yet? What am I doing wrong? And I think many women end up accidentally turning healing into another performance metric. Like, I should be more evolved than this by now. I should be less emotional by now. I should know how to handle this better. And honestly, that mindset creates even more suffering because now you're not just feeling discomfort, you're judging yourself for feeling discomfort. That's exhausting. And I think one of the biggest mindset shifts for me was realizing not every feeling requires immediate action. That sounds simple, but it changed a lot for me emotionally because I started noticing how quickly my brain wanted to react to everything, fix it, figure it out, analyze it, control it. And honestly, sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is nothing, not forever, not in a passive, ignore your life kind of way, but in a grounded, I do not need to emotionally attack this experience right now kind of way. Because I think acceptance gets misunderstood a lot. People hear acceptance and think giving up, settling, avoiding responsibility. But that's not what real acceptance is. Acceptance is allowing reality to exist before trying to force it into something else. That's different. Acceptance says, this is what I'm feeling right now. This is where I am right now. This is what's happening right now without immediately creating a war against it. And honestly, I think many women have been at war with themselves for years without realizing it. At war with their emotions, at war with uncertainty, at war with imperfection, at war with rest, at war with not having everything figured out. And eventually, living in constant internal resistance becomes exhausting because tension is exhausting. Fighting yourself is exhausting. Trying to control every emotional experience is exhausting. And I think what's interesting is many feelings move naturally when we stop gripping them so tightly. But when we panic about the feeling, we keep feeding it attention and resistance. It's almost like emotional quicksand. The more aggressively you fight it, the more trapped you feel inside it. And honestly, I think some women have forgotten that emotions are designed to move. They rise, they fall, they shift. But when we immediately start analyzing and controlling them, we often accidentally prolong them. I've noticed this especially with anxiety. Sometimes the anxiety itself lasts 10 minutes, but the resistance to the anxiety lasts all day. The overthinking, the monitoring, the fixing, the fear of the feeling, that's what keeps the nervous system activated. And honestly, I think one of the most healing things women can learn is I can survive a feeling without immediately fixing it. That's powerful because now you stop treating discomfort like an emergency. You stop assuming every emotional fluctuation means something is wrong. You stop believing you have to force yourself into a perfect emotional state to be okay. And honestly, I think that creates a kind of peace most people are desperately craving, not because life becomes perfect, but because you stop fighting your own experience constantly. And I think this is especially hard for high achieving women because they've spent years succeeding through control, through effort, through management, through optimization. So naturally, their brain tries to apply the same strategy emotionally: control the feeling, manage the reaction, optimize the mindset. But human emotions don't always work like spreadsheets. Sometimes they need space instead of strategy. Sometimes they need compassion instead of correction. Sometimes they need to simply exist for a minute without being treated like a malfunction. And honestly, I think many women are so uncomfortable with stillness. because stillness removes the illusion of control. When you stop fixing, you have to actually feel what's there. That's vulnerable. And I think a lot of women are afraid that if they stop managing themselves constantly, everything will fall apart. But honestly, sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes when you stop tightening against your experience, your nervous system finally relaxes. Sometimes relief comes from stopping the fight, not from winning it. And I think this is where the real shift happens. Not asking, how do I fix this? But asking, what happens if I stop trying to fix this for one moment? What happens if I let this feeling exist without immediately reacting to it? What happens if I allow myself to simply be human for a second? That's uncomfortable at first, especially if your identity is built around competence and control. Your brain will scream, this is lazy, this is unproductive, you should be doing something. But honestly, you don't need to obey every thought your brain produces. You can notice the urge to fix without automatically following it. That's freedom. And I think that's the experiment this week. Not trying harder, not analyzing yourself more deeply, not fixing every uncomfortable emotion immediately, just pausing and saying, I'm allowed to be here for a moment. I'm allowed to feel this without immediately solving it. I'm allowed to exist without turning every experience into a project. And honestly, sometimes that's where relief finally starts, not through more effort, but through finally letting yourself stop fighting for a minute.
Thanks for listening to Experiments in Happiness. You can find more tools and resources at experimentsinhappiness.com.